Hi there, I'm Sam, one of the co-founders of New Realm. We're a software company that works primarily with healthcare researchers. In this video, I'd like to share how we think about the whole process of building software, like apps or chatbots for researchers, starting from brainstorming and budgeting all the way through to the end of your study. I'm hoping this will be helpful information regardless of whether or not you work with us, and of course that you'll feel comfortable giving us a call if you ever need a hand or advice. In this video, I'll start with ideas on how to get ready for a study before it's even funded. Then we'll talk about what happens when the project is approved and funded. Woven throughout this, I'll point out the biggest pitfalls we see and, more importantly, how to avoid them. I hope all of this will provide a good overview of the process that we've used successfully over the years, which I'm hoping that you can use to maximize the chances of success in your next study. We'll get to the good stuff soon, but I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I co-founded New Realm about 25 years ago, and we specialize in custom software development. Our primary focus nowadays is on work with healthcare researchers. We consult as early as proposal writing all the way through the close of a study. We have a really amazing team. I'm pretty sure the most important skill I've developed over the years is finding and keeping amazing people here at New Realm and finding amazing clients. At this point, our average employee tenure is about 6 years, and we have clients that have been with us for over 15 years. Okay, enough about me. How about you? Coming at this presentation with the idea that you're the type of client we work with most, a researcher at an institution, maybe like these clients shown here, working on anything from privately funded research to an early career grant, something like an NIH R01, a bigger grant, or maybe even a large center grant. It doesn't matter. We just think that you probably love what you do and you need software to support your work, but software engineering was not your chosen career path. So I'd love to help with a little advice that we've learned over the years. Finally, quick disclosure, we do the sort of work described here. So obviously, I'd like to work with people like you, but I don't want to imply that we're the only good option. There are a lot of fantastic development partners out there, and I'll share my opinion on what to look for in a partner in this video. Okay, I want to start by telling you about the 3 biggest pitfalls that we see in building software for research projects. These are things that we've seen over and over in our work, and any of them can really have completely devastating effects on a project if they're not dealt with. However, the good news is they're all totally avoidable with a little bit of planning. So let's get started with the first one. I call this one sneaky complexity, this first pitfall. The software component of a project can seem very simple, when often those aren't anything but simple. A common example is thinking about building, just an app for a mobile app for a study without considering, a long list of possible showstoppers that needs to be planned for. So for example, how's the app going to get deployed to the app stores? That's a pretty big task. It's often forgotten. Well, you need a data portal. That's something that's not often thought about initially with a mobile app. Sometimes it's felt like the app itself is the thing when there's this other part that needs to be built. What participant actions are you going to need to track in the app? That's super critical to think of early. And, a long list of other little details. I'm going to share examples and hopefully give you a good framework for thinking about all these things as we go through this presentation. So the second pitfall I like to call the low visibility problem, which is it can be really difficult to peer into the development process to know how things are going as your software is being built for an app. It's sort of strange to say, but how do you know if the development team really is building what you want? Not maliciously, but they think they're building what you want, and it's not quite true, especially in those early phases when there's not much to look at. So it doesn't have to be that way. I'll share some tips for how to stay in sync with the development team soon. And then finally, the last big pitfall that I'd like to address is this idea of what I call the post-build void. Some people say that the real work starts when the software is built and the study starts, and I tend to agree. So I think the hard part is often getting your app, keeping your app running, and helping users deal with any problems along the way after you've built the thing. So I'll give you an overview of what this looks like, and then we'll hopefully you'll have enough information to kind of plan these things and just avoid all of these problems altogether. Woven throughout this video will be the 4 essential elements of these software pitfalls: figuring out how to build a great team of collaborators, doing just the right amount of planning, creating great communication with your entire team, including your software team, and developing a great process. Okay, quick roadmap. I'll talk briefly about what happens before funding. As you know, the life of a project can be many years. And for those of you doing grant funded work, this usually starts in the proposal writing phase, long before you actually get to work on your project. So we spend a lot of time with clients and partners here, and I'll provide some tips for including software in your grant writing process. Things get exciting after a project is funded. I'll spend the most time in this big phase of a project. And of course, in between those two things, you've got to get your project approved. And that's something that I can help a little bit with when we talk about grant writing in the first, or proposal writing in the beginning, but I can't help you with the wait. So sorry about that. As you know, writing a good research proposal has a lot to do with finding the right collaborators. So I'll share a couple of thoughts on this now, really focusing on this great collaborators element that I mentioned earlier. So how do you find a good software partner? Your first step, obviously, when you plan a study is finding collaborators. Here, I'd like to share some important elements to look for in that software collaborator. No single criteria is absolutely required, but they all help in different ways. So first, it's very helpful to find a collaborator who has built products that look something like the product that you want to create. This isn't essential. New Realm hasn't always built something identical to what the next project demands, or we never would have done anything. But it's really helpful when you can find a partner that knows the type of product you want, because they can help you anticipate pitfalls and avoid them. They can help with budgeting, they can help with planning, and it really helps when it comes time to do the work itself. Second, it is really nice to have a software partner who knows what it's like to collaborate on research work in particular. Again, not essential, but it will make your life easier if they know what an institutional review board is and how they work, if they understand data safety concerns, they get the type of data you'll need to collect, and maybe they even know something about the university purchasing process if you're doing academic research. Third, look for a team who can deal with the size and scope of the project that you're looking to embark on. Any software task of any level of complexity is going to require diverse skill sets, usually across multiple people rather than one really smart person. So think about that. And then finally, I think the most important trait to seek out is to find a person or a team that you really trust and enjoy working with. This is my most important criteria when looking for employees, clients, partners, and I think it's really a key to fun, fulfilling work. Okay, now that you've found your collaborators and gotten the project funded, what's next? You'll see that I've given roughly equal weight here to planning, building, and then this kind of launch, maintain phase. Not that building your app isn't critical, but it's so important, yet often undervalued, to get those other two pieces right in order to run a successful study. So we'll start with planning. Although planning started way back when you proposed the work, detailed planning starts here. This is going to help you greatly reduce one of the biggest software pitfall risks, that sneaky complexity risk that we talked about earlier. So why so much planning? One of my coworkers likes the analogy of building a house. A good builder can build nearly any type of house you want, but carefully spelling out what you actually want them to build in the first place is crucial to you being happy with the result. So that's what we're going to talk about here. But software isn't usually familiar territory, so it's easy to think about what you need in terms that are too simple. And this is the root of that sneaky complexity pitfall. So before we talk about the planning details, one thing I like to think about is this 10x rule. Think about the cost of updating a document, a Word document with requirements. Pretty easy, right? It doesn't cost much to go in and add a new bullet or change something. But then maybe you've gotten to the point where you've got a nice visual sketch of your app. Making an update there isn't a big deal, but it's certainly quite a bit more labor intensive than just updating your text document. And then let's skip ahead to making the same update in a finished app that 100 people are using. This can become very costly. It can cause big problems in your study. Maybe some participants then aren't going to get the same experience that others got. So, the takeaway is really think about planning as pushing your problems into a much cheaper, much less stressful phase of the project, which is early. So what elements should you plan? Well, there are quite a few of them. A good software collaborator is going to help you with most of these, but it's always up to you to think about what you really need for your study. Your software partner might not know your participants or your work as well. So I'll go over a sampling of some of the important ones now and share a few examples. This isn't exactly related to software development itself, but I think it's always nice to point out that dealing with IP issues is almost always easy when it's done early. But like other things, it can be tougher the longer you wait. So, you're building something valuable. I think it makes sense always to think about how all the partners are going to work together. If you're hiring somebody, this is pretty easy. You own the work that they build because you're hiring them. But when you're doing collaborative work, it makes sense to just think this through early. All right, so let's talk about one of these things that you'll want to plan if you're building an app. In the case of what we usually think of an app, there are a couple of options. So on the left here is a web-based, mobile-friendly app, accessible from any browser. This is a common approach, and it's really just a website that looks and behaves like an app. It doesn't get installed on the phone. You get to it from your web browser, and it's often great, and I'll tell you why in a second. On the right is a native mobile app, a real app, if you will. This needs to be installed from one of the stores, the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. And this approach can handle things like push notifications and using a device's sensors in ways that you can't with that web-based approach that I just mentioned on the left. So, the question is, why not always just build one of these real apps on the right? Well, mobile apps are very expensive to develop and maintain and deploy. So, we think 3 to 5x more costly for everything. So, for example, it might take 30 minutes to change and publish some text updates on a web app. But the same changes on a native mobile app might take hours because development teams got to test it on various devices. They need to publish it to one or both of the app stores. They have to get it approved and so on. So this is a really important early decision if you are building an app, to think about your audience and a lot of different factors to sort of make sure that you know which of these options you want and you make a good trade-off between budget and functionality. Let's see. So quick example. This is a project we worked on called Moodring. It's a small business innovation and research grant funded by National Institutes of Mental Health. We worked with partners from University of Pittsburgh. Really a cool app that uses passive sensor data and seeks to provide monitoring and feedback to adolescents with mild depression that often don't get the monitoring and feedback they need. So thinking about some of the planning ingredients that we've covered so far, the IP here is shared by New Realm, Pitt, and UVA, the partners that work together. And it was important that we build this as a native app because we do need to use sensor data. We need to send notifications to the users. And, it was really important that we think about good design because this app's being built for adolescents who are a discerning audience in terms of design anyway. So let's move on to another one of the ingredients from that big ingredients list, a data portal. More generally, maybe how data is going to be handled in your study. And although an app can exist without a centrally located portal, it's very likely that you'll need one in the cloud somewhere, maybe on your institution's infrastructure or maybe with a hosting provider like Amazon or Google, in order to manage participants, let them log in, track activities, store progress, and so on. So there's a big range of what you can do with a portal, starting from really simple participant management, maybe managing, using a portal to manage content in your app so that you don't have to redeploy the app every time you change content. Maybe you want to sync your study data with other tools like REDCap or Qualtrics or something else that you built. Or maybe you need a really sophisticated portal that's going to coordinate a whole bunch of data between a lot of different apps. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. This is a research app that grew into an extensive portal, which I'll show you in the next slide. It's called the Bright app. It's a behavioral intervention and data collection tool. It helps therapists employ safety planning and promote emotion regulation among teens who are depressed and or experiencing suicidal thoughts. And it's owned by the University of Pittsburgh, a group called the Etude Center. And back to our just kind of basic ingredients, we had to really focus on good design. We needed to build this for both iOS and Android because we wanted to hit a wide demographic. Functionality evolved over 6 years, and it grew into this portal, this data portal that I'll tell you about in a second. And again, this was a center grant owned by the University of Pittsburgh. But this portal, or this app, grew into an extensive data portal or Data Portal grew around it, providing web-based support for clinicians and researchers, and a way to combine data from this Bright app and a couple of other projects we built for the same center into one location that they can use to coordinate work across basically a whole ecosystem of apps we built for this project. I wanted to share this example because in this case, something that was more of an afterthought in the early planning stages, this data portal, came to be one of the most important elements of the project. So it came about as the research team tried things and real study participants honed their ideas. So that brings us to this idea of planning. How do you plan all these things? Typically, once you've really done some discovery work, you end up you want to write some sort of document that will detail exactly what is being designed and built. You want to think about, just as an example, user roles. Who's going to use this thing? What does each role need? What do the screens look like? What does it actually look like and feel like? What's the content? What's it going to do? Is it going to have notifications, SMS functionality? How are you going to build it? Basically everything about how this thing's going to work. And, it's oftentimes better to err on the side of planning too much than planning too little. It's oftentimes very easy to err on the side of planning too little, but that can result in surprises that you may not want in your project. There's a lot more to say about design, but very briefly, design is crucially important. It's an essential part of the requirements process since it guides what will be built. It's part of what you're going to give to your development team so that they understand what they need to build. But it's a crucial element of managing participant engagement. We all know that engagement is one of the toughest pieces of a study, and careful design for your audience is critical. So this is something that we could spend days, weeks, and months talking about, but I just want to get it on your radar that it's a crucial piece of every project. So there's a lot more we can talk about in the planning bucket, and I really could talk for days about it and do so in projects when we start projects. But I hope the high points we hit here were useful and gave you a feel for the sort of big problems that you can easily plan your way around. This planning phase is the key to the sneaky complexity pitfall that I mentioned. So next, let's talk very briefly about building your app or portal, this middle building phase. And I'm just going to dedicate one slide here and provide some key points that you need to deal with the second big pitfall of software development, which is that of low visibility. A basic best practice is the use of good code version control. This allows your development team to track all changes by developer, roll back to previous versions. It also provides the foundation of code review process, where members of the development team review each other's work before it gets pushed into production. We found this to be essential to good communication. And while we're talking about code, I would strongly recommend making sure that you have access to the code that's being written. And I can give you examples of ways to do that, what that really means. Second, I would just make sure that your team has a good code testing process. This topic is a deep rabbit hole. Testing can range from simple automated tests to a QA checklist that somebody goes down every time an app is released. I won't go into details, but I just want to get this on your radar. This is another critical element. Next, task planning. You've got a requirements document and a design, and this needs to be translated into development tasks. These tasks should be getting documented and tracked in a web-based system like Asana or Jira, and carefully managed. And ideally, as a client, you should have the option of having access to that system so that you can see what's happening at any time in the project. Whether or not you choose to participate at that level, make sure you're having at least weekly meetings with your development team in order to ask questions and develop a clear understanding of what's going on into the project. So this is a very, very brief dive into the development phase of your project, a topic that people like us here at New Realm spend entire careers thinking about. But I think it gives you just some really important highlights of what you need to avoid this low visibility pitfall. Please shoot me an email if you want to talk about the details. I mentioned some things very quickly here, but I'd be happy to go into details. All right, finally, after lunch. So software development work is done and it's time to relax and have a pina colada. Well, maybe not quite. This is the phase, this after build phase is the phase that can easily turn into that post-build void pitfall that I mentioned before, where it's often found that some very important elements of the project's success weren't planned for or budgeted for. But fear not, like everything else, a little planning, communication, and collaboration goes a long way here as well. So first thing to think about, what you should have thought about in planning, is how are you going to roll this thing out? Are you ready to put it in the app stores? How does this software interact with your consent process? And how's your onboarding team going to make sure that people can get successfully onboarded? How do you know if users have problems early? How do you avoid losing data? Really important questions that need to be thought about. Once you launch an application, the next step is this important element of maintaining it. And that's interesting because once an app is launched, it comes to this next stage of an app's life that it's easy to neglect. Any software, it turns out, needs a certain amount of care and feeding. That work increases quickly as you add more users and more data. And it's important to think of this phase in your software's life as the one where it's actually doing the work that you spent all this time crafting it to do. So as with most of the things I've talked about so far, you can avoid a whole lot of problems just by planning and budgeting for this. So very briefly, plan sort of a surge in support right when you launch an app. Users have a way of finding things that were never found before. Think about a less intense phase, a month or two after you launch, where you have enough of a budget and you have enough of a team to make minor feature updates and to apply security updates as they become needed. Maybe do some data requests, and then think about what you're going to do when the study's over. How are you going to get the app off the app stores, archive data, etc. All right, I hope this overview, I know it was really quick, I hope it helped, and I hope it provided you with a framework for a solid development process. So just to recap, some pitfalls we see all the time. Software's complexity can be more than one thinks. It's sometimes hard to know what's really getting built, and it's easy to miscommunicate. And then, it's really easy to avoid accidentally avoid thinking about how to maintain the software once a study's launched, but that's really important. You can avoid all these pitfalls with a great process, great communication, great collaborators, and great planning. And those things really are not that hard to put together. They're just things you really have to think about. Carefully thinking through the planning, building, and maintenance phases should weave in these essential elements. And like I said at the beginning, there are a lot of great partners out there that you can choose to work with. Certainly not just New Realm, but if you're curious about what that might look like with New Realm, we'd love to talk. We're in it for the long haul. We're allergic to high pressure sales. Sometimes we brainstorm with somebody about a project and then don't hear from them for years. That's perfectly fine. We don't mind. So drop us a line if you'd like to chat about anything, or you'd like any details about this super duper quick overview of building software for your next research project. Thanks for listening, and best of luck in your work.